However, the unofficial theme really was Republican unity, because that is what we heard from Republican lawmakers all day today. And judging from the crowd behind me, former President Donald Trump has just walked into the building. Lara, that's right. The president said allies were absolutely fundamental in this deal involving 7 countries and 24 detainees in what was a complex and historic deal. Authorities here say they are still searching for those who are unaccounted for. If you look behind me, you can actually see the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the point where it just drops off the remains of it after that cargo ship slammed into it early this morning. Ed, Maria, that's right. Following that failed speaker vote, we can tell you protesters with Jewish advocacy groups came into the House Cannon building and have occupied this building. You can see right now that police are actually taking some of these protesters away in zip ties. Another major question at stake here: when will the justices issue a ruling? Prosecutors in the former president's case are hoping to have it tried prior to the November election. Good morning. Well, the desperate search for the missing continues, and thousands of people remain without basic necessities like water, heat, and electric, and that's due to damaged infrastructure. You can see an example of that right here behind me. Part of the problem is rebuilding some of the vital infrastructure here in Mayfield that the deadly tornado took out, including this water tower, which held hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. Felicia, the stakes are extremely high for former President Donald Trump and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. A candidate has never won both Iowa and New Hampshire and then failed to secure their party's presidential nomination. Just to give you a lay of the courtroom while we were in there, during the proceedings, the former president sat there very calmly, hands crossed. He was soft-spoken while answering the judge while she was reading his charges and his conditions of release. Tonight's going to be all about margin of victory. There is little doubt former President Donald Trump is going to win here in South Carolina. The question really is, by how much? Former UN Ambassador and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is looking to keep this race tight and competitive to give herself momentum heading out of the Palmetto State and into some of these upcoming contests. From taxes and inflation to pro-business policies, like many voters across the country, small business owners here in New Hampshire tell us the economy is their #1 issue. And while some tell us they're confident they know which candidate can best tackle those issues, others tell us they haven't been convinced. To win the minds of voters, candidates are speaking to their pocketbooks.
We're the greatest economy in the history of our country.
Small businesses are the heartbeat of our economy.
And if you ask voters, what are the most important issues for you in this upcoming election?
We need to get our fiscal stuff straight.
You can see why.
As a business owner, it has to be taxes.
I look for candidates who understand the value that manufacturing create in the economy.
John Morrison employs 650 Granite Staters.
We make investment castings in this facility for the aerospace market.
At this manufacturing company, his great-grandfather acquired nearly 8 decades ago. How important is that, making more of these types of jobs in the country?
Yeah, it's extremely important to us. I mean, that's why we come to work every day.
While Morrison knows the issue he's voting on, he still doesn't know who he's voting for.
I can't say for sure one way or another right now whether another 4 years of Trump or Biden or Nikki Haley would be helpful until we really see them in action.
He says the candidates haven't talked enough about their economic policies and are often distracted. Do you think the culture wars have kind of dominated the political talk?
I think so, unfortunately. And again, I think at the end of the day, those are not necessarily the topics or the policies that have the most impact on people's daily lives.
Monday will be the final opportunity for both Haley and Trump to make their final economic pitch to voters. In New Hampshire, I'm Christopher Salas. Here at Fort Moore, leaders say heat is one of the biggest challenges cadets face when training on the installation.
Next gunner.
At one of the largest military installations in the country,
Load and make ready.
hundreds of cadets train to fight potential enemies.
1, 2, 3, up. Now drop your gear.
While fighting an enemy we can't see.
The climate in general takes a large toll on the trainees and their operational readiness.
The Defense Centers for Public Health reports each year more than 1,500 soldiers develop heat illness, hundreds of them here at Fort Moore.
We're not going to be able to eliminate. The best thing we can do is prevent.
Go.
That prevention takes many forms in the field, but it begins in the classroom.
We actually saw 3 heat strokes Monday morning from Ranger School.
Dr. David DeGroot has run the Army's Heat Center here on base since it started in 2019. following a spike in heat-related injuries. Since then, DeGroot says heat exhaustion cases have doubled.
We're real comfortable with those numbers going up some, whereas heat stroke numbers have been reduced by 70%. Heat stroke is what can kill someone when not properly treated.
DeGroot runs a class each month giving drill sergeants best practices,
Lane 1.
like changing training schedules during excessively hot days. But
When every day's hot, that option's been taken away.
and it could get worse. The Union of Concerned Scientists warns if the planet warms at the same rate it has been, by 2050, on average, U.S. military bases will face an extra month of dangerously hot days, putting soldiers at bases like Fort Moore under greater threat. Do you believe your work has saved lives?
I think so, but I think the point is worth emphasizing that it's a team effort.
Ready, set, begin.
The Heat Center provides recommendations. Commanders conduct training.
Keep them up until you get ammo.
Drill sergeants conduct training. We give them the tools to do so smartly.
Got it?
Tools that drill sergeants like Sarah Escarcega say will help them defeat one of the biggest threats they face.
We are obviously going to cater to whatever is being provided to us by the environment, right? Something that's out of our control ourselves individually and our training. So we're just going to adapt as we have to.
The Department of Defense is investing billions of dollars to try and mitigate the risks of climate change, some of that money going to preventing climate-related illness and also creating climate-resilient infrastructure. At Fort Moore, I'm Christopher Salas, WBAL TV 11 News. Get the facts on polling. Pew Research says polls or surveys seek to measure public opinion on a range of subjects. But how do they work? How accurate are they? And what should you look for? Let's start with how they work. You and some of your friends are having a party. It's a really big party, and you want to order pizza. You aren't going to be able to ask every single person what topping they want. But if you ask 10 partygoers, you might get an answer that looks something like this. There's always one guy. In polling, those answers are called a representative sample, and those samples are gathered in a lot of different ways: telephone, email, online surveys, and even snail mail. The size of that sample can vary too, depending on the type of poll and who's conducting it, which you may be asking, how accurate can a small sample actually be when it comes to the views of our very big pizza party, or for political polling, the entire country? Well, polls aren't a census. Like our pizza survey, they're not designed to perfectly figure out what everyone is thinking on a particular issue or candidate, but rather get a good estimate. The strength of a poll can be determined by its margin of error. The larger the margin in the poll, the less reliable. A smaller margin may mean it's more reliable. To make the estimate more accurate, pollsters use random sampling and weighting. Random sampling is designed to help pollsters reach a mix of various people from different demographics and backgrounds. Think age, race, income, education. But because a random sample doesn't always give you a perfect mirror of what society looks like, pollsters then use math and statistical models to adjust for differences. This is known as weighting. But that's not all. You should always look at the methodology of a poll. Who's conducting the poll? How are the questions being asked? Sometimes polls are designed by organizations or campaigns to get a particular answer. Back to our pizza example. If I wanted pepperoni, my poll might ask, would you rather eat a pepperoni pizza or this piece of paper? That's not a difficult choice. But I could then say that my poll showed pepperoni was the overwhelming choice. Another factor to consider, what is being measured? Polls you see right now might show national polling of presidential candidates. And while that may be interesting, you have to remember, we don't hold a national presidential election, we hold 50 state elections. So watching state polls may give you a truer picture of election results. At the end of the day, polls are valuable but imperfect tools. They're not forecasts of the future, rather a glimpse of what people might be thinking at any given time. And it's also important to remember this election season, polls don't decide elections. Voting does. Helping you get the facts, I'm Christopher Salas. Mike Ashley, so that meeting is being described as frank and angry at times. Some senators following that meeting said they liked what they heard and they're confident in the president's re-election plan. But others say they just did not hear enough data or evidence that President Biden can beat former President Donald Trump this November, and they're not convinced. Democrats are divided on President Joe Biden's electoral prospects.
He can do this, and I trust him, and we are going to win in November.
If things stay as they are, it's likely that Donald Trump will win the election and it will lose the Senate and will lose the House.
Those doubts come as the first senator, Peter Welch, is joining a growing list of Democratic lawmakers calling on President Biden to end his campaign.
I'm expressing my opinion. You know, ultimately the president's going to have to make his own decision.
I am running and going to win again.
The president insists he's staying in the race. His top campaign advisors meeting with Democratic lawmakers Thursday to ease anxiety following the president's debate performance.
Some of my concerns are allayed. Some others have been deepened.
Several recent polls indicate a noticeable shift against President Biden, including nonpartisan election forecaster Cook Political Report, which says several critical swing states are shifting toward former President Donald Trump.
The campaign's trying to demonstrate here's how we're going to do better.
Right.
The question is really whether they can they move the needle.
Political analysts say the president will have an opportunity to do that Thursday night with a primetime press conference at the NATO summit.
I don't remember, though, just in terms of performance, an event as critical to a politician's future as today's press conference.
Some Democratic lawmakers came out of that meeting with the president's re-election aide saying regardless of how the president performs tonight during this press conference, they need to see him perform better, more consistently. Mike, Ashley.
Now, Christopher, this is the first time the president has faced the press solo in months, right?
Ashley, that's exactly right. So the last time we saw President Biden in this kind of freewheeling question and answer format was about 8 months ago after a summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. And again, experts consider this tonight critical for the president trying to convince both voters and lawmakers why he's not only fit to beat Donald Trump in November, but then serve another 4 years in office. The White House says this is one of many public appearances that the president is planning here in the coming days, weeks, and months. Morning. There are some looming questions over those debate performances, particularly for President Joe Biden. I can tell you I was on the spin room floor following the debate yesterday. All of the questions directed at the Democratic surrogates were for President Joe Biden's age and his mental fitness. During the debate, President Biden early on especially lost his train of thought. He was low energy and he did have several gaffes. Now, as for former President Donald Trump, his surrogates were really hailing the performance, saying it was a dominant victory. However, the former president did engage in some behavior that voters have said is concerning, particularly making lies and misstatements, also not committing to accepting the upcoming results of the upcoming election. I'll send it back to you now.
All right, Christopher Salas live for us there in Atlanta, right outside where that debate took place last night.